Okay, seniors, we are about to tackle Act Two of Macbeth. We left off with Macbeth and his wife plotting the death of King Duncan, and now we're going to see the fruition of that. So we start though with Banquo and his son Fleance talking. Banquo's, notably upset and a little bit disturbed. He's uneasy with what's going on with Macbeth. Sorry, let me fix that. Apologies. He's uneasy with Macbeth because he's worried that Macbeth might actually be about to act on this. He wants to be king, and so there's a little bit of concern that Macbeth might actually take steps and do something he shouldn't. Maybe Banquo's considering the death of the king. Maybe he's not, but the fact is that he's worried. He knows Macbeth is his friend, and he's concerned about him. So right at that point, though, Macbeth shows up, and Macbeth, and kind of ironically, Banquo asks who's there, and Macbeth says a friend. Now remember, our fair is foul, and foul is fair theme. This isn't a friend, okay? We're going to find out more about that in the next. I believe it's the next act, but we're going to see the groundwork laid for this friendship to be completely over. All right. So at this point, Macbeth is basically feeling Banquo out about, hey, we need to talk about something later. Banquo says, hey, so do you think much about the witches? And Macbeth's like, no, I don't think about them. So we get that he's lying to his friend now already, which means he's not gonna, obviously include Banquo in these plans. Because he knows Banquo is a good guy, so he doesn't want to do that. So we start to see this little bit of cat and mouse game between them. Banquo leaves, and then we get the dagger soliloquy from Macbeth, which is a really important one, where Macbeth points out, this imaginary dagger he sees pointing towards Duncan, dripping in blood, which makes him think that obviously that means he's to go kill the king. The problem with omens and signs is that you can easily misinterpret them. It could easily just as much mean if that Macbeth goes through with this, he's going to die. But we tend to see omens and signs that fit what we want them to, and that's exactly what he's doing here. And he points out that let me back up. He's saying things that definitely indicate that there's a little bit of evil involved with him. If you look at the lines around 50 through 55, we get things about Hecate, who's the queen of the witches. We get witchcraft. We get a wolf. We get a lot of ghosts. We get a lot of scary, spooky imagery attached with this. So, and Macbeth again is praying to these powers that he can pull off what he needs to pull off, which is obviously evil. There's no question. Okay. All right, he hears a bell and he goes off to handle the deed, just to kill the king. Now, this is going to happen off stage. Shakespeare didn't always do the deaths on stage. It makes things a little bit awkward at times. Like I know that we saw Julius Caesar stabbed on stage, but a lot of deaths happen off stage, or they just, it would be hard to pull them off the way you could like it with modern technology, and even on stage. They don't look very realistic. Okay, so then we get scene 2. And this is Lady Macbeth. She's waiting on Macbeth to come back and tell her he's done the deed. She's anxious, you can tell. She keeps hearing noises, and she's suspicious, and she even thinks they've been caught. But then Macbeth shows up, and man, he's having a day of it. The guy seems completely distraught. They start talking about noises they heard, and they point out that apparently Malcolm and Donalbain, King Duncan's 2 sons, Malcolm we've already met, Donalbain's his younger son, that they had woken up with a nightmare and had screamed out murder, which of course, ironically, that's exactly what was going on. When they go back to sleep, they say their prayers, and Macbeth tries to utter the words amen, just to try to make himself feel better, and he's unable to. Seems like a minor detail, especially in our world today, but in theirs it wasn't. What that means is that God is no longer with Macbeth. Macbeth is so far removed he can't even say holy words. So he's very upset about that. He's exceptionally upset. Lady Macbeth, at least this part, has absolutely no conscience about it. It's just like, grow up, get over it. You shouldn't have an issue with this. Quit being a sissy. She consistently berates Macbeth, and then she notices that Macbeth's made a mistake. Yeah, he's brought the daggers with him. Now, a little bit before, she pointed out that she would have killed the king herself if she wasn't so, if he didn't look so much like her father, which was our first little sign that maybe there's a little bit of a human being in this woman. But man, she's going to bury all that right here. And she talks about how wimpy Macbeth is for caring about this. She tells him a little water clears us of this deed. In other words, go wash the blood off your hands. You're fine. Macbeth points out once she leaves, because she's going to go take the daggers and put them back, because Macbeth refuses. He's like, I'm not doing it. I cannot physically do this again. But Macbeth points out when he's by himself that he feels like, if he was to put his hands in the ocean, instead of it washing away the blood, he would turn the entire ocean bloody. Guys, that is guilt. That is guilt, at an extreme level. Macbeth is obviously showing signs of guilt. Lady Macbeth, on the other hand, just doesn't care. All right. She comes back. She points out to Macbeth, look, I got blood on my hands too, and I'm not being a sissy like you. So she continuously beats him over the head with that. She finally gets Macbeth to go with her and leave and go back to their room so that no one suspects them. Okay. So the king's dead at this point. Then we have scene three, which is going to involve a very common thing in Shakespearean tragedies, and that's the little bit of a comic relief in the guise of the porter, who's going to interact and with Macduff and have several disgusting jokes. He's got several toilet humor type of jokes. He talks about wetting himself and some other more scandalous things. But this was common in Shakespeare because you needed jokes like this to appeal to your low class, the groundlings who were there, because if not, they were going to riot and throw things, not just like tomatoes or lettuce, but like furniture at people. So that's what this scene is really about. But it also introduces Macduff. Macduff is a really important character who shows up and lets him know, hey, I'm here. The king wanted to see me. At that point, Macbeth and Macduff have a brief interaction. Macduff goes to find the king. So Macbeth knows what's about to happen. In that process, waiting for Macduff to find him, Lennox, a random noble, lets us know that nature has acted very funny the night before. And this is, again, a common thing in Shakespearean plays called the pathetic fallacy, the idea that the actions of humanity are reflected in nature, or the problems of humanity are reflected in nature. And so they're acting like, the death of the king caused, wind to blow down chimneys and all sorts of other odd things. But at that point, Macduff comes running back in and just raising the alarm, trying to find Malcolm and Donalbain, letting everyone know that the king's been murdered. Lady Macbeth and Macbeth play it really well. They act like they have no clue what's happening. Macbeth runs off to see what had happened. Macduff and Lady Macbeth have an interaction where she plays like, oh, what happened? That couldn't have happened here. Macbeth comes back, says a great line. He says, had I but died an hour before this chance, I had lived a blessed time. For from this instance, there's nothing serious in mortality. All is but toys. Now, of course, it looks like this is Macbeth faking it because he wants to look like, oh my God, the king's been murdered in my house, if only, or my castle, if only I died a little earlier. And it's a good act, except it's not always an act. Think he actually could mean this really too, because if he had died just a few hours before, he wouldn't have murdered the king. He would have this guilt on his conscience. Because remember, Macbeth is just ate up with guilt right now. All right, eaten up with guilt right now. Okay. Donalbain and Malcolm come in and a very weird characterization. Like they announce to them, your father's murdered, and Malcolm's like, oh, by whom? Like just such a not the right response for that. And then we learn that the story about it being the guards is still being put out there. The guards must have killed him. At least that's the way it looks. And we find out that as they're starting to come to and about to be questioned, Macbeth kills them both. Why does he do that? Well, because now they can't ask questions. So despite Macbeth having some guilt, we see that he's definitely okay with covering his tracks. So now we've got the king dead. We've got the two guards dead. And we know that he's also plotting to get rid of Malcolm. So that would be like 4 bodies right there. There's some hints that maybe he wants to kill Banquo. That'd be another one. That'd be 5. So, then you've also got, what about Donalbain? What about Banquo's son, Fleance? You start seeing that the dominoes kick over. We're going to have a lot of bodies if we're not careful. Now, an important detail. After Macbeth says he killed the guards, Macduff starts to show suspicions. Like, why would you do that? And Macbeth's like, well, because I was so angry, and they betrayed my king in my own house, and Macduff feels like this is not okay. Lady Macbeth, I guess, senses there's a little bit of tension, so she fake faints. She's good at doing this kind of stuff, and then that kind of breaks the situation up. Malcolm and Donalbain kind of have a little side discussion. They're like, hey, we should probably get out of here. And there's a weird line. He says, our tears aren't brewed enough yet, which means it seems like they're not really that sad that their dad's dead, which that bothers me and is confusing a little bit, but okay. And they decide to get out of there. Now, here's the problem. When these two, take up and get out of there, it makes them look guilty. So that's kind of gets Macbeth off the hook for any kind of suspicion here, and it makes it look like Malcolm and Donalbain paid these guards to do this. Macbeth, and all the other lords swear vengeance. And, we have Act 3 set up. at this point, where Macbeth is going to be king, and we're going to see the chaos that ensues from that. But there's one more scene. It's scene 4, and it's kind of it's not really a necessary scene. Like if I'm putting this play on and I need to cut time, I'd probably cut this one. But it just builds on the earlier pathetic fallacy. We get Ross talking to an old man, and in the movie I showed you guys, they do a really good job making the old man actually one of the witches, which I think is a really cool way to do this. But the old man again points out some weird things that are happening in nature. The weirdest of those being Duncan's horses, the king's horses, broke out of their stalls and ate each other. Horses don't eat other horses. Okay, horses don't eat meat. So that right there is like obviously very against nature. Remember Macbeth, or any of Shakespeare's stuff, the word nature is always key. Okay. Um, we also kind of get a little bit of hesitation. We start to see that Macduff doesn't like Macbeth. At the end, it's like they're going to go and Macbeth is going to be crowned king, which would be a massive event. All of the people would show up. It'd be like today having a president crowned, and used to be anyway. All of your politicians would show up because it's such a big event. Now, of course, half of them have to play baby and not show up to things because everything's so partisan in our ridiculous country at this point. But in this time period, if Macduff doesn't go to Macbeth being, crowned, it kind of sets him up as I'm not on board with this, which is going to put him at odds with Macbeth right away. And you know what? Macduff's fine with that. He goes home. He's not going to go and deal with Macbeth. Okay. And that's it. Hey, right at 11 minutes, a little bit over, we managed to get through all of Act Two. So I'm going to stop here. Hopefully this is helpful for you guys. Hopefully got some of the questions answered. If not, you guys know you can always email me and let me know where you're struggling. Okay. So anyway, guys, have a great night. I'm going to try to maybe consider going ahead and doing Act 3, but if not, and you try to move on to do the Act 3 questions and the video is not there, I'll get it to you tomorrow at the latest. Okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you for your time and best of luck.